Hey folks, welcome back to my neck of the woods. My name's Dika, where I share my experience and knowledge, hoping to lessen your learning curve. So today I'm going to talk about how to increase your hookups when you're out fishing. How do you get more fish to actually get on the hook and stay on the hook? I've got a couple things that do work, and they've worked for me, and I've made mistakes over the years, and hopefully this can help you out, all right? So before I get started, please sub the channel, like my videos, and of course make some comments. You know that I love the comments. So how do we get more hookups? How do we increase our hookup ratio? How do we get more fish to bite the hook and stay on the hook? So I've got a couple things that I'm going to work out here, and this application is for fishing across the board. I don't think that this advice falls into any one category. For the majority of my fishing purposes is largemouth bass out of my kayak when I'm out fishing, or striped bass out surf casting. But all of this information applies to both, all right? So let's get started here. So first off, to increase your hookup ratio, one thing that you need to do is add a trailer hook. Now, adding a trailer hook is you can just take regular hooks and you can put them over a hook, as long as the eye is larger than, if you don't know what the eye of the hook is, I'm sure most people know, but this is the eye of the hook right here, this here. So this has to be larger than the barb on the hook, or if some people crush the barbs and you have to put that over, and if it's on a spinner bait or a chatter bait or whatever type of bait that it's on, it could be on a Pumbaa Magnum Walker, and you have an inline hook, and then you have another trailer hook on top of that. All it's going to do is just add an extra hookup to increase your hookups when those fish are finicky, or they short strike something, or even if they miss it altogether, or even if they come up sideways, sometimes you're going to foul hook them. But the more hooks you have in the water, the more chance you're going to have when that fish comes and strikes whatever you're at, whatever you have, it's going to give it a better chance of hooking up. All right, so add a trailer hook. Secondly, increase the number of hooks that you have in the water. You need to, then there's regulations on this. So in Massachusetts, where I'm from, for freshwater, you can't have any more than 3 hooks. But they could be 3 treble hooks. I hate treble hooks altogether, but you could use inline hooks, or but that's on one lure. You can't have more than 3, I believe, and then on one line you can't have more than 2. So like umbrella rigs and things of that nature are illegal for freshwater fishing in Massachusetts. As far as saltwater, I'm not sure of the legality of how many hooks you have. So if you say you're doing, like, I'll be out surf casting with, say I'm out surf casting with bait, right? I will put like a piece of chunk bait down here, and then further up I'll put like a teaser with a hook on it. That's 2 things in the water that the fish can bite at that are sort of appealing to the fish, and it's going to increase your hookups, just having more hooks in the water. Also, in a freshwater applications, I do know that umbrella rigs are illegal, but you can have an umbrella rig with only 2 hooks on it. So just say the other ones are just sort of teasers or distractions, or just other fish that are in the water, and at hopes you could put like 1 hook at the end and then 1 hook on the other side in the sort of beginning part. You can also use what's called a donkey rig. I plan on doing a donkey rig, and I just never get around to it. I have so much content. But a donkey rig is, a lot of people use it with flukes and paddle tails. It's the same thing as my saltwater hookup. You'll have a line coming down with a swivel, and then another line with 2 sort of fluke style baits, and they'll swim, I can't speak, but they'll swim together and won't get tangled. There's probably a bunch of videos on a donkey rig on YouTube. I'm sure you could check those out. But that's one of my many things that I'd like to get done on YouTube, is show people a donkey rig. So increase the number of hooks. You do have to check the legality of the state that you live in, or the country that you live in, to see what is legal. All right. Third, I think this is probably one of the most important things, is you want to bend your hooks. Now, there are hooks, I'm going to show you a hook right here, that is already bent. It's just called an offset hook. So you want a hook so you can see that this barb is not in line with the shaft. The barb is just slightly this way. that's going to increase your hookups immensely, especially with bait. Bait, or if you're doing freshwater applications, you're going to do a soft plastic, say you're doing a Senko worm or a lizard bait or a creature bait or whatever. You want to take that, usually it's like an extra wide gap hook. You want to take that hook and take a pair of pliers, and you're going to bend it to the side. And all that's going to do is put the point or the barb of the hook so it's not in line with the shaft of the hook. The reason being, when that fish comes up and bites it, a lot of times that hook will turn sideways inside the fish's mouth. That's why circle hooks are, a lot of times they'll hook right in the corner or in the roof of the mouth. A lot of times they don't get gut hooked. But a lot of times when a fish, say this is your lure or your bait or whatever, and you're pulling it through the water, once that fish bites down on it, that hook is going to turn sideways. And if it's turning sideways and the barb is flat in line with the shaft, sometimes you don't get that hookup. But if it's just slightly off, that barb is going to catch the inside of the mouth. These are, I use these for surf casting. These are Gamakatsu 8/0 circle hooks. They're octopus hooks, but they're really not. I'm not going to get into hooks. I could do a whole 2-hour video on hooks alone and probably still not cover everything. And I don't know everything about hooks either. But an octopus hook, usually, this is bent, and then this points in the same direction on the same sort of plane as the eye of the hook. This claims to be an octopus hook, but it's not. It's not. I don't know why, but maybe it's something that Gamakatsu does that I'm just not aware of. This is a circle hook, but not all circle hooks are offset. This one just, the 8/0 happen to be offset, and that works. I don't have to bend them, and these are stout for my striper fishing. Another thing you want to do is make sure that you're using bigger hooks. Bigger hooks catch more fish, not just big fish. It all depends on the size of the mouth that you're working with. So for my applications, I'm working with bass, and bass have relatively large mouths. Even a smallmouth bass or a small largemouth bass, so under a pound, the mouth is still this big. So you could still use an 8/0 hook on a fish that big, because when they open their mouth, it's going to go around it. A lot of people believe that if you're missing hookups because your hook is too big. I completely disagree with that. You want an offset hook, and you want to go bigger. You want a bigger hook. I fish for largemouth bass, and a lot of the frogs I'll use a 7 or an 8/0 beast owner hook in like a Demikier frog or something like that, or any type of topwater frogs. And if you look at those hollow body topwater frogs like Live Target or Spro, whatever the manufacturer is, those hooks are beefy and they are big. Which leads me to another thing with bending the hooks. If you're going to use those soft body frogs, on like a Spro or a Live Target or whatever it is, those hooks, they come up like this, right? You want to bend them just slightly up off the top of it. You may catch some more weeds or something like that, but that's going to increase your hookup. It goes along the same lines as this. Sometimes that bait's going to turn sideways in that fish's mouth, and if the hook point or barb is in line with this, it's just going to be flat, and it's just going to run its mouth over, and you may end up losing that fish. But if the barb sticks out just a little bit, it's going to catch that fish. It's going to catch it. Obviously, if everything's upright and it's off to the side, you have a better chance if it stays like this, but there's many, many times just the compression of the fish, that hook is going to turn sideways, and if you have an offset hook, it's going to catch the inside of that fish's mouth. Make sense? Hopefully it makes sense. Okay, so that's a lot about hooks. All right, so you want to use a leader, and reason being, everyone's using braid now. If you're not using braid, you don't need a leader. But if you're using braid just has no stretch to it. So when you're going to set that hook, a lot of times you're just going to rip the bait out of the fish's mouth, a lot of the time. But if you have a leader, something with mono or fluorocarbon, it has stretch to it, and it just allows a little bit of give when that fish takes it and swims away with it. That's going to give just that amount of tension, so the fish the fish will be able to pull it, and then it'll be able to set almost itself in there using a leader. And even when you go to set the hook, you're not just like pulling a straight rope out of their mouth. It's going to have a little bit of give, even with larger applications. So I use a 50-pound leader when I go out striper fishing, and it still has give on the fish. Even if I catch a schoolie or whatnot, it's still going to have a little bit of give as opposed to the straight braid, which is not. So that's another way to increase your hookups. All right. So on to the next thing. You need to pay attention to the type of fishing pole that you're using, and specifically the power and the action. I always thought that this made no difference. You could go out there with a medium heavy rod. All I carried was medium heavy rods because I liked them, and they were the most abundant for the most part. In my opinion, and this is going to go to striper fishing, in my opinion, in this, and surf casting at that. As far as freshwater application, you really kind of need to look into it and do your homework, because there are different types of rods out there for different types of applications. And if you're just a beginner and you're going to go out there with the Senko and just going to change it, and you only have one rod and you can only afford one rod, that's fine. I would go out and get a medium rod with like moderate to fast action. That's what I would get. A medium heavy rod is not good for all applications. And a heavy rod is only good for those really, really giant swim baits that you're throwing. A medium is going to give you enough to load up, and you're not going to miss bites if you're using, say, you're moving a crankbait, and then you're using a worm, and then you're moving a jig. You're still going to be able to get those hookups without the rod failing you, so to speak. And that's exactly what I use striper fishing. Currently I'm using a 10'6" medium, medium moderate to fast action. So the medium is the power of the rod, how much weight the rod can hold before it bends and where it's going to bend in the rod. And the action it pertains to the tip and how it works back and where it's going to load up. So a fast action rod, the top 20% of it, when you get a bite or when you're using a heavy lure or whatnot, it's going to bend probably in the top 20%. But a fast to moderate, when it's really going to allow that fish to pull the rod, and then it's going to load up. So when you set that hook, you're not just like flicking the top of it. You're really going to have a lot of power in that rod, which leads me to the other part. You need to pay attention to the line ratings, and you need to pay attention to the lure ratio. So I'm going to give you an example here. And this is my surf casting. So when I first started surf casting, I had a Penn Battalion 10-foot rod. It was a medium, moderate to fast, and it had 1 to 3 ounces. I think it was a half to 3 ounces, and I lost hookups because of it. And I think it only had like 10 to 20 pound line on it, and that was with braid. The rod itself just didn't bend. I was bait fishing too. It just didn't bend where it needed to load up to keep that fish pinned and keep the appropriate amount of pressure on that fish. So if you're bait fishing, you want something like moderate or moderate fast, so it bends almost in the top 1/3 of it, and so that fish is going to pull away, and the top of it's going to bend, and it's not going to notice that much on that. But when it starts to really bend, that's when you're going to set your hook, and the rod is going to load up, and it's going to be able to pin. I don't know if you've ever seen people saltwater fishing or striper fishing where they're pulling and they're constantly pumping the rod. I don't think that you need to do that if you have the appropriate rod. Most people just go out like the Cape Cod Canal, where a lot of people fish. They just grab the biggest reel they can get, and then they'll grab a heavy rod because they're throwing giant baits. You do need the heavy rod, but you could get away with a medium heavy rod just rated for heavier stuff, as opposed to the heavy rod where it's not gonna bend where you need it to when you catch those smaller fish. When you catch those giant fish, it's going to work for you, and it's going to bend, and you're going to be able to hold enough tension on that fish to keep it pinned. I hope this is making sense to you. But you need to pay attention, whatever your application is. If you're surf casting, and if you're surf casting for striped bass and bluefish, my advice would be to get at least a 10-foot rod something that's rated from like, I don't know, a half to 4 ounces. And a 4-ounce bait is a big bait. What did I say? And moderate to fast action. That's what I would recommend if you're going out surf casting for like striped bass and bluefish. That's what I would recommend. That's what I use. And since I have upgraded, excuse me, when that Penn Battalion, I lost a little bit. I didn't have enough oomph in the rod. It just didn't bend where it needed to. And I suffered for that. So now I have a Temple Fork Outfitters. It's 10'6", has a little bit faster action on the top. It's fast moderate, but it has a little bit more length, so it's going to give me some really good bend. It is 3/4 to 4 ounces, and it's a medium rod. It's a 2-piece. All surf casters are 2, or some of them are 3 pieces. But if you want, like, say you're fishing, say bass fishing, saltwater, freshwater fishing, right? And you're fishing like a crankbait, and that fish is going to bite it real quick, and you want to get that hook set quick. That's when you want a fast tip, like a lot of, or a soft tip, people say, but you want a fast action rod, because that you're pulling the bait this way, and that fish is going to pull it the other way, and you want to be able to set that hook quickly, and that's when you need a fast tip. So if you're jigging along the bottom, that's when that medium heavy comes in, and that moderate action. You could even do moderate fast at that too, but that's with that moderate action in. And then the heavy rods, they do come with fast tips, but it's more for those heavy baits that you're throwing. I could go on about this forever, but that's all I really have for that. I don't want this video to be too long. And the last thing I have to mention, and is that to increase your hookups, is you got to let that fish take the bait. If you're fishing bait, you got to let it take it. You got to let the rod do the work. I'm sure you've heard this experience before, and that goes along with choosing the correct rod for the correct application. Like I said, I used to think it was bullshit before, and just use whatever rod, and they all work, and they do all work. But if you are able to match the rod to the application that you're using, it can make a difference, and it can get you more fish, or more fish hookups, so to speak. But you got to let that fish take the hook. So, say you're bait fishing, right? And you get little bites, a little tap, 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 tap. That's not when you set the hook. You set the hook when the fish pulls away. When it starts to pull away, and then you let that rod load up, and then you got good tension, and you pull it back. With circle hooks, here in Massachusetts with bait, they require circle hooks, and you don't really need to set a circle hook. You just need a little backwards pressure, and they kind of set themselves for the most part. And they set themselves in freshwater applications, but there's a lot of fishermen that don't like them. They feel that they lose hookups because of a circle hook, but that's not what a circle hook is designed for. It's designed to actually hook more often with this sort of hooked barb right here that comes back, and it really catches it. But that's all I have for you. Hopefully you can hook up more fish, catch more fish, use some of my advice, and hopefully it works for you, and hopefully I get some comments saying, holy crap, I got an offset hook and now I'm catching them like crazy. All right? Be well, sub the channel. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.